This video is sponsored by Chord Company, manufacturers of the speaker cables and interconnects used by a British audiophile. For more information about these and their other products, please click the link in the description. What's your preferred music source and why? Actually, why don't we make that the question of today? There's no rule that says I can't do it at the beginning of the video rather than at the end. For me, it's streaming. Even though I use my streamer more as a music server to access my 2TB Western digital hard drive containing over 12,000 tracks, including my high-res library and the content from over 600 CDs that I ripped in a lossless WAV format. I've never been much of an album listener. I love creating playlists. It reminds me of my teenage years when I used to put mixtapes together. It was a crude way of impressing girls, but a great way of getting all my favourite tracks in one place. Anyway, these days I listen to Tidal, but if I really like an album, I go to the trouble of owning the physical media, even if it's just downloading the high-res file or getting the CD and ripping it to my hard drive. Although the idea of spinning silver discs still appeals to me, and the allure of the 12-inch vinyl LP is ever present, but if I'm honest, neither are likely to become my primary format for enjoying music. There are so many affordable second-hand CDs these days that it's a great way to build up a music collection. So the idea of a DAC with a CD transport fitted inside seems like a winner, and this one's from one of Hi-Fi's establishment, Rega. Yeah, they make DACs and CD players too. The Rega Saturn Mk3 retails for £2,000 in the UK. It's a sturdily built unit in a full rack width chassis, measuring 432 by 82 by 322 mm or 17 by 3.2 by 12.6 inches and weighing 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. The styling complements Rega's LX Mark IV, Alyssa Mark V and Athos amplifiers, but with more visual interest thanks to a manually operated top loading mechanism, although the plastic cover looks more Starship Enterprise than Saturn Rocket. It may have to compete with turntables for top-shelf honours in some homes, but it's much more satisfying to engage with than a troublesome slot drive or flimsy tray mechanism. A solitary power button is located to the left of the display. On the right are basic CD controls for play, pause, stop and to skip back and forwards. However, users are reliant upon the multifunctional remote control in order to access rudimentary DAC functions. I can't help feel that Rega have missed a trick here. 3 additional buttons on the left of the display would not only provide nicer mirrored visual symmetry, but would be handy to switch the Saturn between CD and DAC mode and to toggle up and down the DAC inputs. DAC connections run along the rear left. The USB input is limited to 192 kHz and 24-bit resolution. There are 2 further optical Toslink inputs and 2 coaxial ones. Digital pass-through outputs are also provided on optical and coax. Some potential customers may be disappointed by the lack of an AES EBU or I2S input, but I feel they'd be asking for a lot on this dual-purpose device. However, balanced XLR analog outputs would be welcome for people running long cable runs. So the Saturn Mk3 has just single-ended RCA analog outputs. There are also digital, optical and coaxial outputs from the CD transport for those wishing to connect to external DACs. The CD transport and DAC sections have dedicated power supplies fed off one transformer. In CD mode, the signal path is kept to a minimum to preserve integrity, and the DAC's asynchronous USB input is galvanically isolated to reduce noise. Digital to analog conversion is handled by 2 Wolfson DM8742 chips, known for a natural sound but not the last word in fidelity. Running them in dual mono mode allows Rega to sum and average the channels on each chip to reduce noise and improve measured performance. Fun fact, the Saturn was originally developed as a DAC and then a CD transport added, as opposed to the other way around, though I think most people will be buying it primarily as a CD player. So let's start with its performance as a disc spinner. The Saturn Mk3 adheres to the stereotype of a musical sonic presentation. The bass is weighty and a bit plump. The mid-range is full with some softening to the leading edge of notes, and the upper registers are refined but not uber detailed. It's not a slow and ponderous sounding player though. The Rega's too good at handling percussive rhythm sections for that, but it may not appeal to the analytical audiophile, more one for those looking for something a bit more fluid and forgiving. Which prompts me for this week's music recommendation, Duende by Bosio, Levin and Stevens, a largely improvised track by three great session musicians pulling together influences from rock, jazz and flamenco. The Saturn Mk3 delivers Terry Bosio's drums and Tony Levin's bass with authority and an appropriate sense of timing, and takes some rough edges off the recording so I can enjoy Steve Stevens' guitar playing virtuosity. I'm sure we all have music in our collections that we love but wish was recorded a little bit better. Actually, while I'm at it, why don't you share those experiences in the comments section as well. Back to the Rega. It's capable of producing a soundstage that is wide with a marginal amount of depth, but the placement of performers, that's a little bit organic. It's this sense of full tone delivered with drive and good dynamics that will draw many to its musical presentation and allow them to forget about audiophile preoccupations of hearing every detail. So you guys and gals up for some comparisons to other digital sources I've reviewed on this channel? Let me start with a trio of CD players that I reviewed in 2024. The Marantz CD60 may have an MSRP of £849, but it's regularly on sale for around £500. It's flimsier in construction, but has a more neutral tone than the Rega. The CD60 isn't as resolving as the Saturn Mk3 though. Beautifully constructed out of one billet of aluminium, the SMSL PL300 was reviewed at the same time, yours for a bargain price of £549 on Amazon these days. The PL200 is crisper and a touch cleaner sounding than the Rega. But the Saturn Mk3 has a wider soundstage with better instrument separation. It also has more acoustic mass in the bass and mid-range. Overall, it is the superior sounding player. Completing the trio of CD players that I reviewed last year is the £699 Arcam CD5. It has a similar sonic character to the Rega, although I suspect the CD5 is a touch warmer sounding and less revealing than the Saturn Mk3. I say suspect because without having the Arcam here at the same time, I wouldn't want to say for certain. So does that make the CD5 a relative bargain at around a third of the asking price? Sure, but once you take into consideration that the Rega player also has a built-in standalone DAC and more substantial construction, suddenly the price disparity seems more reasonable. Moving away from CD players to other digital sources, the Saturn Mk3 is a little less resolving than the Bluesound Node Nano, which also has a more neutral tone and delivers crisper mid-range transients. Although the Rega player compensates by having greater saturation to the bass and mid-range and presenting a slightly wider soundstage. The Nano is crazy value at £300, but it's stripped back to all bar its essential features and housed in a simple plastic box. It may sound really good through its analog, coaxial and optical outputs, but USB, that sounds awful. Actually, one of the main strengths of the UK-made Rega Saturn Mk3 is how consistently it performs across all its inputs and outputs, whether it's used as a CD player, CD transport or DAC. So let's get into the specifics of all of that. I've already mentioned that having to rely upon the remote control exclusively to switch between DAC inputs and in and out of CD mode is irksome, so I really hope that someone from Rega is watching this video and takes note for a future edition. That aside, the Saturn Mk3 is pretty straightforward to use. It's worth mentioning that when in DAC mode, 5 digital filters are accessible from the remote, but it's equally valid to state that switching between linear phase, minimum phase and the apodizing filters makes no difference to the sound. Every time I ran the listening test to convince myself that there was a subtle difference, I ran them again and convinced myself that there wasn't. Eventually I gave up. The digital inputs on the DAC section are also very consistent in how they sound. There's no discernible change when playing through optical or coax, whereas USB sounds just a teeny tiny bit cleaner. As purely a DAC, the Saturn Mk3 is outclassed by my Denafrips Aries 12-1, which for circa £1,000 offers greater information retrieval, presented with less sonic coloration and better spatiality. I would look upon the capability of the internal DAC inside this Rega device to be very comparable to very good external DACs for circa £500. But if you're planning to use it just as a CD transport, I think you're wasting your money. Both the CD drive and DAC sections complement each other very well, with neither placing a limit on the performance of the other. For the best value for money, they should be used together. I was able to open up the soundstage and get a bit more detail by bolting on my Denafrips Aries 12-1, but not enough to justify the extra expense due to the ceiling in the CD transport's performance. Here again, the Bluesound node Nano, through its optical and coaxial outputs, provides a slightly cleaner signal. So, just to be clear, I'd forget about using the Saturn Mk3 purely as a CD transport. At the price, it makes much more sense as a whole package. Right, time to pull everything together. I suspect most people will be buying the Rega Saturn Mk3 as a CD player. Here it offers a step up in build quality and sound quality over the CD players I previously reviewed below £1,000. The DAC capability adds value and is ideally suited to the CD drive, although I'd like basic input selection to be added to the unit as opposed to only being accessible through the remote control. This is not the most resolving digital source you're going to find for £2,000, but I expect it works great with Rega amplifiers, both visually and sonically. The Saturn Mk3 has an easy on the ear type of sound and a very good sense of rhythmic drive, which extends its appeal beyond the owners of other Rega electronics. The Rega Saturn Mk3 gets a recommended from this channel. I've already asked the question for today, so just a couple of reminders. Share what music source you prefer and the reasons why, and also recordings that you really love but wish were recorded better. I'm sure you know what to do by now if you want to support me here and what I do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon, there's a couple of tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also check out the ABA Club on Patreon, which has some great ways to interact with me and fellow Patreons. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.